In the spring of 1952, something extraordinary happens. UFO sightings go off the charts. For years, the U.S. government has told the post-war public that UFOs do not exist. But secretly, U.S. Air Force commanders are divided. Some Air Force personnel believe the sightings are explainable atmospheric phenomena. But others wonder if we have been visited by a more technologically advanced alien civilization. Join us as we investigate the 1952 UFO Wave, a spike in sightings so extreme that the U.S. government is forced to confront the UFO phenomenon head-on. A global effort has begun. Secret files hidden from the public for decades, detailing every UFO account, are now available to the public. We are about to uncover the truth behind these classified documents. Find out what the government doesn't want you to know. Unsealed. Alien Files. Exposing the biggest secret on planet Earth. July 29th, 1952. Major General John Samford, the Director of Intelligence for the U.S. Air Force, holds the largest press conference since World War II. The reason?
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States.
Throughout the spring and summer of 1952, there are more reported UFO sightings in the U.S. than at any other time in history. The public knows it, and Samford tries to calm their nerves.
Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them.
But what about the hundreds of UFO sightings that radar and eyewitnesses cannot explain? To understand, arguably, the most unique year in modern UFO history, we must go back to the beginning. 1952 begins with fewer than one reported UFO sighting per day. By April and May, sightings increased to 3 per day. Then in June, the rate of reported sightings doubles, and they have yet to peak.
This was orders of magnitude beyond anything that the American military had seen before. It took the UFO phenomenon to a completely new level.
From July 22nd to July 29th, UFO sightings spiked to 27 per day.
The sighting spike is considerable. So you have to ask what exactly was going on in the nation.
The Air Force is gravely concerned. Their job is to patrol the skies, but something is happening that they cannot explain. Unsealed case file. The Hawaii sighting. March 1952. Navy Secretary Dan Kimball and Admiral Radford are flying in separate planes over Guam en route to Hawaii.
During the course of this flight, Kimball and Radford looked out the window and saw an unidentified flying object that they couldn't explain. As they watched this object, they said it streaked across the sky.
Air Force insider and co-founder of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, Major Donald Kehoe, reports Kimball as saying, "The object circled us twice and then took off, heading east." There was another Navy plane behind us, with Admiral Arthur Radford on board. Kimball reports, in almost no time, Radford's chief pilot called back. The UFOs were now circling their plane.
They estimated it actually covered a distance of about 50 miles in less than 2 minutes. The UFO eventually took off and disappeared and was no longer in sight.
When he inquires about the status of the investigation, he receives a surprising response.
He was actually denied access. The Air Force said that they could not disclose to the eyewitness what the status was of the case.
1 month later, on April 29th, 1952, history is made. Unsealed case file, AFL 200-5. Air Force Letter 200-5 is a landmark Air Force directive stating that all UFO reports must be wired immediately to Air Technical Intelligence Command, the home of Project Blue Book.
It talked about the urgent need to use electronic means of reporting, really within a day. But secondly, not to talk about these things to the media and to the public. So right from the outset, what we have is this veil of secrecy surrounding military encounters with UFOs.
AFL 200-5 authorizes Project Blue Book to investigate UFO sightings made by Air Force personnel without the need of going through any chain of command. This all-access pass is highly unusual and underscores the urgency of the situation. Coming up, we investigate the most compelling visual evidence of UFOs in the early 1950s. Footage still controversial to this day. This is Unsealed, Alien Files. In the spring of 1952, the United States Air Force responds to mounting UFO sightings across the country by giving Project Blue Book unprecedented access to investigate UFOs. Its mission: to investigate UFO reports from civilians and military personnel and determine if UFOs are a threat to the nation, and to identify them. Air Force Officer Edward Ruppelt, stationed at Ohio's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, is appointed to lead Project Blue Book.
So this was the guy in day-to-day charge of investigating the sightings reported to the government and the military. Although he still accepted anecdotal accounts and reports from the public, the whole focus of Project Blue Book was effectively reconfigured on pilot sightings and on radar cases.
But one case in July of 1952 confounds him. Unsealed case file, the Tremonton film. July 2nd, 1952. Navy Warrant Officer D.C. Newhouse is driving through Utah with his wife when they notice a strange group of objects in the sky. They stop the car to get a better look and cannot believe their eyes. A group of 10 to 12 objects overhead are flying in a westerly direction.
There were multiple objects that were seen flying through the sky that were not like any conventional aircraft that anyone had ever seen.
Newhouse later describes the objects as shaped like two saucers, one inverted on top of the other. He runs to the trunk of his car and grabs his 16mm camera just in time to shoot this compelling film.
Every now and then, you'll see sort of like an implied constellation of stars. So there seems to be some sort of a communication going on there. What's interesting is that that sort of sighting occurs even now in the skies over the United States, and people film it.
Ruppelt later writes about Newhouse in his 1956 book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, saying, when he and his family first saw the UFOs, they were close to the car, much closer than when he took the movie.
The Tremonton Newhouse film was shot by a witness that saw what can only be described as a fleet of UFOs in the sky.
I love those cases because they were the kind that you can't really fake. You know what I mean? They come from the old school, and they haven't been put up on a Photoshop or some sort of video editing and made. They're actually real.
4 years later, Project Blue Book analyzes the footage and issues a report.
They wanted to try and explain it away as balloons, which sounds like a viable explanation. Unfortunately, they could never prove it. So it went on the books as a true unknown.
And even more disturbing, it looked eerily similar to a famous sighting just 2 years earlier. Unsealed case file, the Mariana film. August 1950, Great Falls, Montana. While inspecting a local baseball stadium with his secretary, Nick Mariana sees something flash out of the corner of his eye. Two bright silver objects fly over Great Falls.
This really depicted, again, multiple objects in the sky.
He grabs his camera from his car and shoots this 16 seconds of film. The next day, the Great Falls Tribune carries the story. And in the weeks to come, Mariana shares his film at several local screenings. But the Air Force considers the objects on the Mariana film to be two of their own.
After the witness got their film back from the United States Air Force, they claimed that they were missing frames from the footage, like it was cut out, cover-up by the United States Air Force.
Mariana claims the frames clearly showed silver discs. The Air Force denies the allegations, but many in Great Falls who witnessed the original film support Mariana's claim.
So the question is, if that's true, what are they covering up?
In July of 1952, 2 years after the Mariana film, Captain Ruppelt, head of Project Blue Book, requests to reanalyze the footage. The original analysis that the objects in the sky were reflections from F-94 jets is dismissed. Ruppelt states, "The lights appeared too steady to be reflections. We drew a blank on the Montana movie. It was an unknown." The controversy over the missing frames is never resolved.
Could this be truly evidence of an alien craft in the sky, and so they wanted to kind of omit that section that really drove it home? Or was this top secret technology that the Air Force didn't want this guy to have and said, well, you can't really discern it here, but you can through frames 10 through whatever, and snip that out?
Coming up, UFOs invade the capital of the United States, and the Air Force is powerless to stop them. This is Unsealed, Alien Files. By early July 1952, UFO sightings dramatically increase across North America, forcing the U.S. Air Force to make UFO investigation a top priority. But nothing could prepare them for what occurs over the most heavily guarded airspace in the world, the nation's capital. Unsealed case file, the Washington, D.C. flap. On July 19, 1952, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport picks up 7 objects on radar. He later describes them as completely radical compared to ordinary aircraft. Headlines the next day read, "Saucers swarm the Capitol." On July 26th, a national airlines flight reports more UFOs. Andrews Air Force Base tracks them on radar. Witnesses describe the lights as traveling faster than any shooting star. By July 29th, the Air Force issues an unprecedented shoot-down order. The Washington Post writes, no pilot has been able to get close enough to take a shot, as the objects are outflying the jets by 1,000 miles an hour. But exactly what is in the skies above Washington, D.C.?
There's something in our skies. It's faster than us. It's more maneuverable than us. We track them on radar. We send our pilots up to try and intercept them, and yet they give us the slip. What's going on in our skies?
Are these UFOs interplanetary ships from outer space? Or is there another explanation? With dozens of witnesses and radar evidence, the Air Force must calm an uneasy public. July 29th, 1952, General John Samford, Director of Air Force Intelligence, holds a press conference.
We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberration.
One of the explanations that was put forward for this by the Air Force was that this was caused by a temperature inversion.
But many in the UFO and scientific communities are unable to believe the explanation.
It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve.
After Samford speaks, Major Donald Kehoe takes the microphone, and what he says is shocking.
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
Just how much did the government know, and how far were they willing to go to keep it from the public? Unsealed case file, the Robertson Panel. January 1953. After experiencing an unprecedented surge in UFO sightings, the CIA convenes the Robertson Panel.
The Robertson panel was a group of scientists, radar experts, nuclear physicists, people that were brought together by the CIA to try and figure out how to deal with the UFO problem.
The head of Project Blue Book, Captain Ruppelt, presents cases with the most compelling evidence. Among them, the Tremonton and Mariana films. But Ruppelt quickly realizes the panel has already come to their own conclusions.
The objective of the Robertson panel was already determined before they stepped into that room and started deliberating what that evidence showed.
After hearing just 12 hours of testimony over 3 days, the Robertson panel's final conclusion is that UFOs do not pose a threat to national security, and that the overwhelming majority of sightings can be explained by natural phenomena.
Many experts now look at the documents and say, well, they really weren't doing their job as true investigators. They were collecting these reports, analyzing them, and pretty much dismissing them one at a time. Weather balloon here, swamp gas there, the planet Venus over here. And they were just completely dismissing anything that came in.
Years later, the secretary of the Robertson panel, CIA operative Frederick Durant, reveals that the Robertson panel was not tasked with investigating evidence, but with, quote, establishing a protocol for debunking UFO sighting claims.
If you've got a case with a really obvious conventional explanation, publicize those cases, and don't, whatever you do, publicize the unknowns.
This is the strongest evidence that Project Blue Book and the 12,000 plus cases that they investigated is not necessarily an investigation, but rather an explanation. And the Robertson panel absolutely proves that.
Coming up, what Ruppelt secretly tells Air Defense Command just 2 weeks after the Robertson panel would have shocked the nation. The 1952 UFO wave shakes the nation and raises doubts about the effectiveness of the U.S. military against unexplained threats. But the U.S. government denies that the phenomena even exists.
It is inconceivable to me, as somebody who served in the Ministry of Defense for 21 years, that one could receive credible reports and then dismiss them without some form of proper scientific investigation.
Captain Edward Ruppelt, the head of Project Blue Book, is asked to brief Air Defense Command. In the meeting, Ruppelt allegedly reveals that based on a statistical breakdown of over 1,000 sightings, only 11% can be positively identified. The remaining 89% are categorized as probably identified, possibly identified, and unknown.
It doesn't matter what these things are. We need to calm the public down because the real threat could be society itself.
Since the extraordinary surge of UFO sightings in 1952, the American government to this day denies that it studies UFOs. But some believe otherwise.
I am convinced that the government continues to investigate UFOs, but I suspect that they do it through the third-party offices of some defense contractor hidden away, well away from public scrutiny.
Without a central organization to collect information on UFO sightings and investigate them, no one knows how many UFO events occur each year. Will there be another 1952? How will we know? And will the government even warn the public? This is Unsealed, Alien Files, exposing the biggest secret on planet Earth.